She gave up everything to care for her sick mother-in-law and was repaid with betrayal. Chapter 1. The Sacrifice. There was no grand announcement. No flowers, no applause, just the quiet closing of a door behind her as Clara left her apartment in the city, maybe for the last time. Her suitcase was worn, half-zipped, and heavier than it should have been. Not because of its contents, but because of everything she was leaving behind. A promising career in interior design. Her small but sunlit studio apartment. Friends who knew. Her laugh and her pain. Dreams that had only just begun to bloom. All of it put on pause, maybe forever, just until she gets better, Clara had told herself. Then I'll come back, then life will resume, but deep down, something told her the return might never happen. It started with a phone call. Late one night, Daniel, her husband of 3 years, had picked up the phone with trembling hands. "It's Mom," he said. "The doctors think it's serious." That was all it took. Within a week, they were packing. But when they arrived at his mother's countryside home, nestled at the edge of a sleepy town, reality hit like a wave. The house smelled like old books and medicine. The air was heavy with silence, punctuated by shallow coughing from the bedroom down the hall. Clara had only met Linda, her mother-in-law, a handful of times. Their relationship was polite at best, but now she was being asked to care for her. Bathe her, feed her, be her strength. Daniel's work didn't allow him to stay. He returned to the city within days, and Clara stayed behind. The first few weeks blurred together in a haze of exhaustion. Mornings started at dawn with pill schedules and lukewarm tea. Linda, once proud and opinionated, now rarely spoke at all. She stared blankly out the window most days, her words few and sharp when they came. "You're not a nurse," she muttered once. "Why are you here?" Clara had no answer, not one she could give out loud, because the truth was complicated, because love asks things of you that logic never would, because sometimes loyalty means erasing your own needs, because Daniel asked, and she said yes. At night, Clara would lie awake on the couch in the cold living room, her phone lighting up with messages from coworkers and friends she no longer had the energy to reply to. "You're amazing for doing this," some said. "Come visit soon," others begged, but visiting meant leaving Linda alone, and even if Clara wanted to leave for a few hours, she couldn't drive. Daniel had taken the car. Time slowed down in that house. The days bled into each other. The world outside felt like a distant memory. She wasn't Clara anymore. She was just the caregiver, the ghost, the sacrifice. One afternoon, she found an old photo album in the closet. It was dusty and smelled like time itself. As she flipped through its pages, she saw pictures of Daniel as a boy, laughing, carefree, hugged tightly by a younger, glowing Linda. They looked happy, whole. Clara smiled, and then her eyes caught a photo she hadn't expected. A wedding picture, but it wasn't her and Daniel. It was Daniel with another woman, younger, blonde, kissing his cheek. Her heart stopped. The name written under it was Daniel and Grace, summer 2015. Clara married Daniel in 2018. She closed the album slowly, her fingers trembling. He had never mentioned a Grace. Not once. Why? That night she asked him during a late-night phone call. "Who's Grace?" The pause was longer than it should have been. "Just someone I dated before you." "Why?" "There's a photo of you two in your mother's album." "Oh, that." He gave a short laugh. She loved Grace, probably never got around to taking it out. Clara didn't press further. But something in her gut twisted, uncomfortable. There was a story there, one he hadn't told her. Weeks passed, and slowly, Linda's condition stabilized. But Clara didn't. Her identity was unraveling. Her dreams, her career, her marriage, they all felt like echoes of another lifetime. She was shrinking inside this role, the girl who gave up everything, and no one seemed to notice, not even Daniel, whose calls grew shorter, less frequent, not even Linda, who barely looked at her anymore. Clara would look in the mirror and barely recognize herself, but then one night as she was helping Linda into bed, something shifted. Linda grabbed her wrist. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were sharp. "You know," she said, almost a whisper, "I told him not to bring you here." Clara froze. "What?" "I said it wasn't fair to you." Linda turned her face away and closed her eyes, signaling the end of the conversation, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Clara walked to the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, and stared into the dark. What wasn't fair? What did she mean? And more importantly, what had Clara given up her life for? Chapter 2. The home that wasn't hers. Clara had lived in the countryside house for nearly 4 months now, but it never felt like home. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern from another era, peeled at the corners like the edge of a secret. The creaky floors whispered in the night, and the air always felt a few degrees colder than it should have been. Even the furniture seemed to reject her presence. Each chair, each lamp, each dish, all bearing the ghost of Linda's past. Clara moved, quietly, carefully, as if she were a guest overstaying her welcome. Except guests were treated with more warmth than this. One morning, Clara prepared breakfast just like every other day. Toast, soft-boiled eggs, chamomile tea. She brought the tray to Linda's room, knocking softly before entering. But Linda was already awake, eyes open, watching her. "I had a dream about Grace," Linda said suddenly. Clara froze mid-step. Grace again. She was wearing that yellow dress, the one she loved. Linda's voice softened. "Daniel bought it for her." Clara said nothing, just placed the tray on the bedside table like a nurse would. Linda's gaze shifted to her. "You're kind," she said. "But you're not Grace." Clara forced a smile. "No, I'm not." That sentence haunted her for days. "You're not Grace." She knew it wasn't meant as an insult, but it landed like one. Because behind those words was a truth she'd been avoiding. She was never fully accepted. Not by Linda, not perhaps even by Daniel. Later that week, Clara found herself in the attic. Not for any reason, just an urge to escape. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten time. Boxes lined the walls, some labeled, most not. She opened one. Letters. Dozens of them. Old, yellowing envelopes with Daniel's name on them. All from Grace. Curiosity wrestled with guilt, but guilt lost. Clara opened the first one. "Daniel, I forgive you, even if your mother never will. But if you're going to lie to her again, don't use me as your excuse. I won't be a cover for your mistakes." Grace Clara blinked. "What?" She opened another. "Stop calling me. I'm not going to be the woman who waits for you to decide who you are. You broke something in both of us. I hope she never finds out what you did." Her hands trembled. Each letter painted a picture that didn't match the version of Daniel she knew. There were words that didn't belong in a love story. Cover, excuse, mistake, lie. She was uncovering something Daniel had buried. And it wasn't about a failed relationship. It was about a cover-up. That night, Clara confronted him on the phone. "Why didn't you tell me you were engaged before?" To Grace, the silence on the other end wasn't shock. It was calculation. "You read the letters, didn't you?" He didn't even try to deny it. Clara's throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked again. "It was complicated," he said coldly. "We weren't right for each other." That's not what she thought. She wrote about lies, about your mother, about using her. Daniel sighed, irritated now. "I don't have time for this, Clara. I'm trying to hold down a job while you play detective in my mother's attic." That word, detective. No, she was never trying to investigate. She was trying to understand. "Why did you bring me here, Daniel?" she asked. Softer now. Silence. Then, "Because you're the kind of person who'd stay." He hung up, and Clara sat there in the attic, surrounded by dust and heartbreak, realizing the truth. She wasn't chosen. She was convenient. She didn't come here because she belonged. She came because someone needed a place to leave their guilt. Days passed in a fog. Linda grew quieter, as if she too sensed something unraveling. Or maybe she always knew. Maybe she'd always known. Clara began to see it in the details. How Linda never spoke of the future with Clara in it. How Daniel only called late at night, never during the day. How the one photo of their wedding was tucked behind a cabinet, never displayed. She was never family. She was a stand-in, a caretaker, a pause button in someone else's story. But something shifted after that phone call. Clara no longer waited for Daniel's calls. She no longer smoothed her hair before walking into Linda's room. She stopped pretending this house was home. She cooked meals, changed sheets, managed medications, but now it was survival, not devotion. And every time Linda mentioned Grace, Clara didn't flinch, because she finally understood. It wasn't just betrayal, it was replacement. One evening, while watering the wilted flowers by the porch, a neighbor approached, elderly, gentle-eyed. Clara had seen her before, but they'd never spoken. "You're Daniel's new wife, aren't you?" the woman asked. Clara nodded slowly. Yes, I'm Clara. The woman hesitated. I thought you should know. Daniel used to come here often, before you, after Grace left. Clara's pulse quickened. Grace lived here? The woman nodded. Briefly, after the incident. Clara frowned. What incident? But the woman only shook her head. I shouldn't say more, it's not my place. Then she walked away, leaving Clara with more questions than answers, and the sinking feeling that the story she had stepped into had chapters she was never meant to read. Chapter 3, Grace's Shadow. The next morning, Clara stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair in silence. Her reflection looked older somehow, more tired, more distant, less like the woman who had left everything behind for love, more like someone who had lost herself. She didn't notice Linda in the doorway until she cleared her throat. Clara turned, startled. You were up early, Linda said, leaning heavily on the cane. You didn't sleep again. Clara forced a smile. I'm fine. Linda's eyes narrowed, sharp, despite the illness eating at her body. You've been going through the attic. Clara stiffened. Just organizing. You found the letters, didn't you? There it was. No denial, no pretending. Just that same cold awareness Clara had come to recognize. Linda always knew more than she let on. Clara sat down slowly. I found the letters, she said quietly, and someone told me Grace lived here after the incident. What happened, Linda? Linda exhaled, long and bitter. She was supposed to be my daughter-in-law, Grace. Smart, driven, good family. I approved of her. Clara's chest tightened. Linda continued, not even looking at her. But Grace, she wasn't blind. She saw things, asked questions. That made her dangerous. Clara leaned forward. What did Daniel do? Linda looked at her then, and for the first time, Clara saw fear in the older woman's eyes. Some lies protect people. Some truths destroy them. Clara's voice trembled. Did he hurt her? Linda didn't answer, but the silence was too loud to ignore. Later that day, Clara drove into town, something she hadn't done in weeks. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe answers, maybe validation, maybe someone who would finally tell her the truth. She stopped at the corner cafe, the kind of place where time moved slowly and secrets hung in the air like steam from fresh coffee. That's where she saw her again, the older woman from the porch. Clara approached, hesitating. Hi, I didn't get your name the other day. The woman looked up kindly. Marjorie, I need to know about Grace, Clara said. Marjorie gestured to the seat across from her. Then sit, because it's not a short story. Grace had come to town with a smile and a ring, Marjorie said. She was charming. Everyone liked her. And she loved Daniel at first, but things began to change after she moved in with Linda while Daniel worked out of state. Grace started withdrawing, stopped coming to town. There were whispers of shouting in the yard, of bruises hidden with makeup, of nights she cried behind closed windows. Then one day, she was gone. She left in the middle of the night, Marjorie said. Didn't even say goodbye. Clara felt her heart race. And the incident? Marjorie looked down, stirred her coffee. There was a call to the police, domestic disturbance. Someone said they heard Grace screaming, but no charges were filed. Linda said it was all a misunderstanding. Daniel said Grace had a breakdown. Everyone else just stopped asking. Clara drove home in silence. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was danger, and she had stepped into a house where truth was buried under decades of silence. She pulled into the driveway and stared at the home. It no longer looked old and quaint. It looked haunted by a woman who had once stood in her place, by a family that never wanted her, only needed her. That night, Daniel called. I heard you've been asking around, he said flatly. I want the truth, Clara replied. There was a long pause. Then he laughed. Cold, cruel. You think this is about Grace? About letters and gossip from old women? Clara stayed quiet. You're here because you chose to be, because I told you I needed help. You said you'd stand by me. She clenched the phone. I did, and you fed me lies. You're not leaving, he said. You owe me. That last sentence chilled her. I owe you nothing, Clara whispered. She hung up. The next morning, she packed a small bag. She didn't say goodbye to Linda, didn't leave a note, just walked to the car, keys shaking in her hand. But before she could start the engine, Linda appeared at the door. You're leaving, Clara nodded. Linda stared for a moment, her voice raspy. Grace left too, but she didn't come back. Clara stared at her, and for the first time she realized what Linda had really meant. Not that Grace chose to stay away, but that she might never have had the chance to come back. Clara drove for hours, until the house was just a speck in her memory, and somewhere, On a quiet road, she pulled over and screamed into the silence, not out of fear, but out of fury, because she had loved. She had cared. She had given everything, and she was never seen as more than a placeholder for someone who had vanished, but not anymore. She wasn't going to disappear like Grace. She was going to make sure the truth came out, even if it destroyed everything. Chapter 4. The Ring. She wasn't meant to find. Clara hadn't planned to return, not after everything, but it was a call from the hospital that forced her hand. Linda had collapsed. Clara stared at her phone in disbelief. She had barely driven, 3 days away. The world should have kept turning without her, but life, apparently, had other plans. She arrived back to the house on a rainy Thursday. The air was heavy, the ground soaked, and the house loomed darker than ever, like it had absorbed her absence and turned it into resentment. Linda wasn't home. She was being kept overnight for observation. The nurse on the phone said she would probably be discharged by morning. Clara didn't want to stay, but it was late, and the hospital was hours away. She stepped inside, the door creaking behind her, like it was protesting her return. The house was quiet, too quiet, but also different. Some things had been moved. A vase she hadn't noticed was now shattered in a bag. Curtains that had been drawn were suddenly closed again. Something was off. Clara walked through the hallway, her steps echoing louder than they should. She reached Linda's bedroom, drawn. There, by an instinct she couldn't explain. On the dresser, next to a bottle of old perfume and a cracked frame with a faded photo of Daniel as a child, she saw it. A small, delicate jewelry box, and something inside it shimmered faintly under the soft hallway light. Clara opened it slowly. It was a ring, but not just any ring. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Linda's. It wasn't something that belonged to the family. Not anymore, because Clara had seen it before. In the photo that fell from the letter, on Grace's finger, the engagement ring. Same shape, same band, same small emerald-studded halo circling a single pearl. Clara felt her stomach twist. Why was Grace's engagement ring in Linda's room? Why wasn't it with Grace? Why had no one ever mentioned it? She picked it up carefully and something fell beneath it. A small, yellowed note. A receipt from a pawn shop dated 15 years ago, with one word handwritten on the bottom, returned. Returned? To whom? Linda? Daniel? Or someone else entirely? Clara turned around quickly as she heard a sound behind her. Just the wind, she told herself, but her nerves were stretched to a snapping point. She clutched the ring and left the bedroom. The next morning, she went to the pawn shop listed on the receipt. It was still there somehow, one of those old, stubborn businesses that refused to die with time. The clerk was different, but after some coaxing and a photo of the ring, he agreed to check the records. Yes, he said after flipping through a dusty ledger. That ring was sold by a woman named Grace, brought in around the time of something messy I remember. Police came asking about her a few weeks later. Clara's heart pounded. And who bought it? She asked. The clerk raised an eyebrow. Didn't sell to a customer. It was taken back by a man claiming to be her fiancé. Said she had a breakdown, didn't know what she was doing. Do you remember his name? He nodded. Daniel. Clara sat in her car outside the pawn shop, stunned. Daniel had taken Grace's ring back after she tried to get rid of it. Why? Why go through the trouble, and why lie about it? She pulled out her phone and opened the voice memo app. From now on, she was documenting everything. When she got back to the house, she placed the ring back in the box. She took photos first, made copies of the receipt. Every piece of evidence mattered now, because this was no longer just a story of betrayal. It was a pattern, a cycle, a trap, and she had stepped into it, just like Grace had. That night, Clara dreamt of Grace. Not the real woman, but some imagined version of her. Pale, silent, reaching out across time and memory like a ghost asking to be heard. Clara awoke in a sweat. The ring still sat on the dresser, cold, heavy, watching her. She knew she couldn't keep ignoring it. Whatever had happened to Grace had never truly ended, and now it was happening again. The next morning, she received a voicemail from an unknown number. She played it on speaker. It was a woman's voice, shaky, low, terrified. If you're living with them, if you're in that house, you need to leave. I don't know how they found me, but they did. And if you're anything like I was, you won't get another warning. Don't trust Daniel. Don't trust Linda. They don't want a wife. They want a caretaker, a prisoner. Click. Silence. Clara stood frozen, the voice echoing in her ears. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was a warning. Chapter 5. The Woman in the Polaroid. It started with a box, just an old cardboard box in the attic labeled Memories. Clara hadn't meant to open it. She was searching for extra blankets for Linda when she stumbled upon it, buried under dusty photo albums and a stack of expired holiday decorations. Something about the way it was hidden made her pause. It wasn't Linda's style to keep things tucked away. Everything in the house had its place, usually right where she could reach it. Clara knew because she had reorganized every drawer, every shelf, every cabinet during the past year of caregiving. But this box, this one had clearly been hidden on purpose. She sat down on the attic floor, heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. She opened the flaps. Inside were Polaroid photos. Dozens of them, stacked and tied with a worn red ribbon. There were letters, too. Old yellowed papers folded into envelopes without stamps, their ink faded but still legible. Clara reached for the photos first. She untied the ribbon. The first photo nearly stopped her heart. It was a picture of Daniel, a much younger Daniel, maybe college-aged, shirtless, smiling, sunlit, with his arm around a woman Clara had never seen before. The woman wasn't Linda. She wasn't anyone Clara recognized from Daniel's family. But the way Daniel was looking at her, Clara knew that look. It was the same look he had once reserved for Clara, in those early days when love was effortless and thrilling. That look didn't belong in a photo tucked away like a secret. That woman didn't belong in their attic. And yet, here she was. Clara flipped to the next photo, the same woman. This time, standing in front of the very house they now lived in, Linda's house. She was holding flowers. Behind her, young Daniel stood in the doorway laughing. A chill ran down Clara's spine. She wasn't sure what she was looking at, but the pictures didn't lie. This woman, whoever she was, had once been deeply entwined with this family. She turned to the letters next. Each was addressed to L, not Linda, not love, just L, and they were signed. Grace. Clara's throat tightened. Grace. The name had come up once. A slip of the tongue from Linda weeks ago when her fever had spiked and she'd been talking in her sleep. Clara had asked her about it later, and Linda had brushed it off, saying it was someone from church who had moved away. But now, with the photos with these letters, Clara knew that had been a lie. She opened one of the letters and read, L, you always said this family would never forgive me, but you and I both know the truth. You protected him. You chose him over me. But one day, Clara will find out. One day you won't be able to keep this secret buried. Clara read the lines again, slower this time. You chose him over me. Clara will find out. She staggered backward, nearly knocking over a box behind her. This wasn't just about an old flame. This wasn't about jealousy or the past. This was about her. This was the past, bleeding into the present in a way that explained everything. Daniel, Linda, and Grace. Somehow, they were all connected. In a story Clara had never been told. One that had been actively hidden from her. She grabbed one more photo, and this time, her breath caught in her throat. It was her wedding day, Clara and Daniel smiling, but in the background, peeking from the side of the frame, was that same woman, older, dressed like a guest, but unmistakably her. Grace had been at her wedding. Clara's entire body trembled as she lowered the photo to her lap. Her thoughts raced. Why had no one told her? Who was this woman, really? And why had Daniel never mentioned her? There were too many missing pieces. She gathered everything, the photos, the letters, and tucked them back into the box. But she didn't put the box back where she found it. She brought it downstairs into the guest room where she now slept, the one that had once been meant for Linda. She placed it under the bed. She didn't say a word to Daniel that night, but she watched him carefully at dinner. She watched how he spoke to Linda, the softness in his voice. She watched how Linda avoided looking directly at her. And when she said goodnight and went to bed early, Clara noticed the look they exchanged, the one they thought she didn't see. She lay in bed with her back to the door, clutching the Polaroid of the woman in front of the house. She didn't cry, not this time. Something colder than sadness had begun to take root in Clara's heart. Not rage, not yet, but something sharper, a sense of clarity, a feeling that everything she thought she knew was about to collapse. Tomorrow, she would confront them, but tonight, she would remember. She would commit every detail to memory, every date, every word, every glance, because Grace had warned Linda. Clara will find out, and now she had, and she wasn't going to let them rewrite the story this time. C'est des erreurs. posso preparar. A introdução do capítulo 6, What else were they hiding? Quer seguir com ele agora? Chapter 6. What else were they hiding? Clara couldn't sleep. The house felt different now. Not in any physical way. The furniture remained in its place. The silence still clung to the corners of each room. But something beneath the walls had shifted. It felt like she was walking through a set, like every piece of furniture. Every smile, every memory she had created here had been placed deliberately to distract her from the truth. She rose early the next morning, hours before Daniel, and brewed a pot of coffee that she never touched. Instead, she sat in the kitchen, the Polaroid of Grace splayed out in front of her beside the letters. No longer in the box, no longer hidden. She needed more answers, more proof. Something that would snap the blurred edges of this mystery into sharp, painful clarity. And that's when she remembered Linda's journals. Clara had noticed them months ago, on the bookshelf in the den. Tucked between old gardening manuals and forgotten recipe books were at least 6 leather-bound journals. At the time, she thought they were decorative or empty. Linda had never mentioned them, and Clara had never had a reason to be suspicious. But now, everything had a new meaning. She grabbed the first journal and opened to the first page. January 14th. He brought her home today. I kept my mouth shut because that's what's expected of me now. But I saw the look in Grace's eyes. She still loves him. I told him this would be a mistake, bringing her back into this house. But he never listens to me anymore. Clara's breath caught. He, Daniel, or someone else? She turned the page. February 3rd. Grace isn't doing well. I think she regrets coming back. Clara is sweet, but oblivious. She thinks this is all new, her life, her marriage. But we're living in a rerun. Only the cast has changed. It's all happening again. And this time I can't stop it. Clara froze. This wasn't about her caregiving. This wasn't about Linda's illness. This was about her entire marriage. A rerun. What had happened before she entered the picture. She flipped further through the pages, desperate for a specific mention, something concrete. And then, there it was. March 19th. I burned the original letter, the one Grace wrote the night she left. I couldn't let Clara see it. It would have destroyed her, or maybe it would have freed her. But Daniel, he begged me. He said it was the only way. So I did it. And now she's trapped here, like the rest of us. Clara stared at the page, the words swimming before her, trapped. She closed the journal, her pulse racing. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was orchestration. Someone had carefully designed the version of reality she lived in, and it wasn't built on truth. It was a stage set, and she was cast as the loyal wife, the dutiful daughter-in-law, and worst of all, the blind one. Footsteps creaked behind her. Daniel. He stepped into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "You're up early," he said, voice still groggy. Clara slid the journal under a kitchen towel. "Couldn't sleep," she said, her voice steady. He kissed the top of her head. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean in either. His touch felt foreign now. Scripted. Daniel poured himself some coffee. "Mom's still asleep. Maybe today we can—" "Who's Grace?" she asked. The question cut through the room, like broken glass. The clink of the spoon against his mug stopped mid-stir. He turned. Slowly. "Sorry?" She looked up at him, her expression calm, unreadable. "I said, who is Grace? And don't lie, please. I'm past the point of tolerating fairy tales." Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted to the letters on the table, the photo half covered by her hand. He swallowed. "Where did you find those? Does it matter?" He sat across from her slowly. "Grace was someone I knew a long time ago. She was at our wedding." Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came out. "I found the photos, the letters, the journal entries. Your mother wrote everything down, Daniel. She may be sick now, but she wasn't always. And she didn't hide her guilt very well. I didn't want to hurt you. Too late." He leaned forward. "Clara, please. Grace was someone I loved. Before you. Before anything. We were young. She left. My mother hated her. And when she came back, everything was a mess. She thought I owed her something. She warned Linda I would find out," Clara said. "What was she talking about?" Daniel looked down at his hands. His voice dropped to a whisper. "She thought we had a child together." The air in the room disappeared. Clara blinked. "What?" "She said she was pregnant when she left, but we never confirmed it. I didn't hear from her again for years. Then one day she showed up at Mom's door. Said she wanted to reconnect. I thought she was just confused, lonely. She never showed me proof. She never introduced me to anyone. But Linda believed her. Daniel nodded slowly. I think so. She said we couldn't take the risk. That, if it were true, it would ruin everything. You and I were already married. She begged me to keep it quiet, said she'd handle it. And she did, Clara whispered, by erasing her. I didn't know she went to the wedding. I swear. Clara stood, pushing her chair back. She looked down at her husband, a man she no longer fully recognized. Whether or not it was true, you let your mother decide what I could or couldn't handle. You both built this life on omission. Clara, I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the second you made that choice. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. She didn't cry. There were no more tears left for him, only questions. She left the kitchen and returned to the guest room, where the journals, the photos, the letters, and her dignity waited for her. Because if Grace was telling the truth, then someone out there might be her husband's child, and Clara wasn't going to stop until she found them. Chapter 7. The DNA test that changed everything. The test sat on the bathroom counter, still sealed in its packaging. Clara stared at it as if it were a live grenade. For weeks now, ever since that hospital conversation, ever since hearing whispered doubts and enduring Marissa's strange, distant behavior, a thought had nested in the back of her mind. A thought so wild, so painful, she kept pushing it away, but it was still there, persistent. What if Elena wasn't? David's daughter? No, she shook her head. David had always called her his miracle baby. They'd struggled to conceive. When Clara finally got pregnant, David had cried with joy. He painted the nursery himself. He went to every ultrasound. How could he not be Elena's father? And yet, there were moments where David looked at Elena with something distant in his eyes. Moments when Marissa would fall silent when Clara talked about those early days. Moments that now, in hindsight, felt drenched in secrets. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Clara opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were 2 swabs and a sterile envelope. It felt wrong. It felt necessary. She waited until Elena was watching cartoons downstairs and then gently called her into the room. Elena, honey, Mommy needs to play a game with you. Can you help me? The little girl giggled. A game? Clara smiled, keeping her hand steady. Yep, just need you to open your mouth like a lion. Roar! Elena roared. Clara swabbed the inside of her cheek quickly, efficiently. That night, when David came home, Clara pretended everything was normal. They had dinner. She tucked Elena into bed. She even kissed David goodnight, but inside, her heart was screaming. The waiting game. The results would take days. Clara went through the motions. Work, home, caring for Elena, pretending with David, but everything was different now. Each time she looked at her daughter, she was torn between love and fear. Each time she looked at David, her stomach twisted. She found herself watching old home videos, the hospital delivery, Elena's first steps, birthday parties. David had always seemed proud, but there were subtleties she hadn't noticed before. A stiffness in his body language, a shadow in his eyes, or maybe she was imagining it. She tried to sleep, failed. When the email finally arrived with the DNA results, Clara almost couldn't bring herself to open it. She took her laptop to the kitchen, sat down, and stared at the screen for a full minute before clicking. Match not found. Probability of paternity, 0%. The room spun. She gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling off her chair. It was real. David wasn't Elena's biological father. The avalanche of memory. Her mind ran back to the early weeks of her pregnancy. She'd been so sick, bedridden. Marissa had taken care of her. David had been away on business for 2 weeks. No. Clara grabbed her phone and called the clinic. She needed more. She needed dates, records, a timeline. Within the hour, she had confirmation. Conception had occurred during that exact 2-week window when David had been gone. And during that time, someone else had been near her constantly, bringing her tea, checking on her, comforting her. Leo, David's cousin. He had stayed with them briefly during those months. After a breakup, Clara had always thought of him as family. Safe, harmless. One night, she remembered, she'd been half awake, feverish. Leo had brought her something. Tea? Soup? She'd passed out again. And now, Clara stood in the kitchen, frozen in time, as her entire world shattered into dust. A quiet fury. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat in silence for over an hour, staring at the test results, at the timelines, at the impossible puzzle that now made horrifying sense. Then, with slow precision, she began printing everything out. The DNA results, the clinic emails, the old calendar she'd saved from that year. She wasn't going to explode. She was going to expose David, Leo, Marissa, whoever had known or guessed, and chosen to let her live in this lie. She walked into the living room with the manila envelope in her hand, where David was watching TV with a beer in hand. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice calm. He looked up, surprised. "Sure. What's up?" She sat across from him and placed the envelope on the table. "Open it." David looked confused. "Clara, what is—" "Just open it," she repeated. He flipped open the envelope, pulled out the first page, the DNA test, and read. His face paled. What is this? You tell me," Clara whispered, "because I just learned that you are not Elena's father." David's mouth opened, closed. He looked like he might faint. "You knew," Clara said, eyes blazing. "Maybe not at first, but you knew, and you let me live a lie. You let her live a lie." Clara, I didn't. Leo, he told me something. "Years ago, and I didn't believe it, I swear." "Then why didn't you say anything?" he stammered. She stood. "You don't get to be silent anymore." Chapter 8. Face to Face with the Past. The sun had barely risen when Clara parked her car outside Marissa's house. She hadn't slept. After confronting David, everything inside her had gone numb. She'd packed a small bag for Elena and dropped her off at a friend's place for the weekend, telling her it was a fun sleepover. Her daughter didn't need to be anywhere near what was coming. Clara stood before the front door, envelope in hand, and knocked. A pause, then footsteps, then the door creaked open. Marissa's eyes widened when she saw Clara. "Clara? Is everything okay?" Clara didn't answer. She held up the manila envelope and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Marissa closed the door slowly. "What is this about?" "Sit down." The older woman hesitated, but something in Clara's voice, something sharpened by betrayal and clarity, made her obey. Clara laid the documents on the coffee table. "You know what this is, don't you?" Marissa looked down, her fingers trembling as she picked up the DNA results. Her face changed. She didn't pretend. She didn't lie. She just closed her eyes. "I begged Leo to never say anything," she whispered. Clara blinked. "So it's true." Marissa nodded. "He told me years ago, after you got pregnant. He said he wasn't sure that maybe. But when Elena was born, he swore he saw his eyes in hers. And David, he suspected, eventually, but he didn't want to know. And I told him to let it go. You were happy. And I thought it would destroy you." "You thought?" Clara's voice cracked, the restraint slipping. "You let me raise her believing she was his. You let him treat me like I was crazy for questioning things, all while you were hiding this?" Marissa looked up, eyes glassy. "You were the best thing that ever happened to our family. I didn't want to lose you." "You didn't want to lose control," Clara snapped. She stood. "Where's Leo?" "He doesn't live here anymore." Clara narrowed her eyes. "Address. Now." The confrontation. Clara's heart thundered as she stood outside Leo's apartment door. He answered on the third knock, disheveled, confused. Then he saw her. His face went pale. "Clara." She slapped him. Not hard, not for pain, but to make him feel something. "You were supposed to be family. You were supposed to take care of me when I was sick. And instead, you took advantage of me." Leo opened his mouth. "I didn't mean to—" "You didn't mean to what, Leo? Get me pregnant? Or let me believe it was someone else's child for 6 years?" He stepped back. "You were barely conscious. I thought you wanted me there. You said my name. You reached for me." Clara stared at him like he was something in a museum. Foreign. Unreal. "I was delirious. And you knew what you were doing." He looked down. "I know. I've hated myself for it every day. But not enough to tell the truth." She pulled the envelope out of her bag and dropped it at his feet. "Now you don't get to hide anymore." She turned and walked away before he could say another word. Breaking the silence back home, Clara sat alone in the living room. She'd told David to stay with his brother for a few days. She needed space. The house was too quiet, but the silence was honest now. Later that night, she opened her laptop and began writing. It started as a letter to Elena, a letter she'd give her someday. Maybe when she was old enough to understand. Maybe when she asked questions about her father, her blood, her history. But as she wrote, Clara felt something else build inside her. Not rage, not despair, but purpose. She had spent too long living in service to others. Marisa, David, a broken family clinging to her like a crutch. No more. She would tell Elena the truth, and then she would reclaim her life. Chapter 9. The day I told my daughter the truth. I had rehearsed it in my mind 100 different ways. What would I say? How much should I reveal? Would she see me as a victim? Or would she see me as a fool who let a lie stretch over years of our lives? I watched my daughter, my Emma, from across the living room as she scrolled through her phone, curled up on the couch in her usual hoodie. She looked so much like him sometimes it hurt. The eyes, the smile, but she was mine, and I had raised her with love, strength, and honesty. At least, as much honesty as I thought she could handle. Now she was 16, old enough to ask real questions, and wise enough to deserve real answers. "Mom," she said, sensing my stare. "You okay?" I nodded and smiled, but my chest tightened. "Can we talk?" I asked. She straightened. "Sure. What's going on?" I sat beside her, taking a breath that shook in my lungs. "There's something I've never told you. About your father, about our past." Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. She just waited. So I began. I told her how I had given up my job, my plans, even friends, to take care of her grandmother, her dad's mother, how back then we thought she was dying, and how I devoted every part of me to that. Care out of love. How I believed we were a family, united by sacrifice and loyalty. Then, I told her how I discovered the truth, that while I was bathing her grandmother, cooking her meals, and praying for her health, her father had been building another life with someone else. Her breath caught. I softened my tone, choosing each word with care. "He didn't just betray me, sweetie. He betrayed the version of our family I was fighting for." She looked down at her lap, silent for a moment. "Did you know about the affair before or after I was born?" "Before," I whispered, "but I didn't find out until years later. And when I did, I stayed for you, because I thought you deserved a home with two parents." Emma's lips parted slightly, her expression unreadable. "I didn't want you to grow up in the middle of a battlefield," I said. "But maybe in trying to protect you, I let too much slide. I let him write the story of our lives for too long." There was a long silence. I braced for anger, for questions I couldn't answer, for blame I might deserve, but instead, Emma scooted closer and took my hand. "You were just trying to protect me," she said. "And you did. I had a good childhood, but I'm not a kid anymore, and I'm glad you told me." Tears stung my eyes. Then she added, "He always felt a little distant. Maybe now I understand why." I nodded. "He loves you in his own way, but he made choices that hurt all of us." Emma looked me straight in the eyes. "And you? What about you, Mom? You gave everything and got betrayed. Are you okay?" Her voice cracked at the end. I felt the years of silence melt off my chest like ice. "I wasn't okay for a long time," I said, "but I'm finding my way back, piece by piece. You helped me do that." She hugged me tightly. I closed my eyes, burying my face in her shoulder. I had feared this moment for so long, but now I realized the truth didn't break us. It made us stronger. Chapter 10. The last letter. She never meant to read. It was tucked between old cookbooks in the bottom of a dusty kitchen drawer. A plain white envelope, yellowed by time, unlabeled, untouched. I had almost missed it, until the corner snagged on my sleeve as I was clearing out the last of my mother-in-law's things. She had passed away 3 weeks earlier, and despite everything, I had cried, because I had once loved her like a second mother, because she had once looked at me with something like admiration before it soured into pity, or guilt, or worse, silence. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The handwriting inside was unmistakably hers. Loopy, elegant, fading with age. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I pray you found this before he did." My heart stopped. She had written to me. "There are things I never said, truths I never had the courage to speak aloud. You cared for me when no one else did, and you didn't deserve what my son did to you." I sat down, the words shaking in my hands. "I knew about the affair. I saw it with my own eyes. He brought her here when he thought you were at work. I pretended to be asleep. I pretended a lot of things. At first, I thought I was protecting you, but in truth, I was protecting him. because I raised him, because I felt responsible. But that was cowardice, and you paid the price for my silence. Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. You deserved a partner who chose you every day, who saw what you gave and met it with gratitude, not betrayal. I watched you sacrifice your dreams, your career, your peace for a family that didn't always return the same. I can never undo what I allowed. But if this letter finds you, I want you to know, he may be my son, but you were the one who acted like family. You were the one who showed up day after day, even when no one saw it. At the end, in a shaky final line, she had written, "Forgive me if you can, and please, don't let this letter stay hidden like I did." I didn't know how long I sat there, but I remember the stillness, the quiet collapse of years of pain that had no shape, finally given words, finally witnessed. I folded the letter and placed it in my coat pocket. Later that night, when my daughter asked if I was okay, I showed her the letter. She read it in silence, tears streaming. Then she said something I'll never forget. Maybe she didn't say it then, but she saw you. And now I do too. And in that moment I knew that everything I had given wasn't in vain. That love, even when betrayed, still had power. And that truth, no matter how late, can still heal. What would you do if someone you cared for hid the truth from you, even until their last breath? If this story touched you, please give it a like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of betrayal and redemption. Because sometimes the truth we discover too late is the one we needed all along.